To those of you who contributed to my legal defense and those who wrote me encouraging messages, I owe you a big thank you. And today I'm finally going to let you know what happened when I appeared before the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal. I'm Janice Fiamengo. As many of you know, I was named along with my university in a complaint to the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal, the HRT for short. The complaint was brought by a former student who alleged that I had discriminated against her because of her disability, and a couple of weeks ago I attended the HRT in downtown Ottawa to answer the charges. We had already tried mediation earlier unsuccessfully, and so a formal hearing was scheduled for February 22nd, 2018, but it ended up not taking place. Instead, the student agreed to a mediated settlement with the university. I'm not allowed to tell you any details of the settlement, though I can say that I wasn't held responsible for any of her complaints and I won't be disciplined in any way. Now, on the one hand, this is a huge relief. The students' claims weren't probably firing offenses, but they were certainly serious enough to cast doubt on my professionalism and moral character. The student alleged that I had made, quote, poisonous remarks in the classroom about students with disabilities and had been deliberately unclear in descriptions of certain assignments so as to limit her chances of success with them. She also claimed that I deliberately chose not to submit a copy of the final exam to the disability office because I had a prejudice against her. She claimed that I harassed her in emails after I missed the exam deadline. Now, if I had done any of those things, I think I'd be a pretty despicable person. It's true that I missed the deadline for the exam, but I did so because I didn't have enough time to prepare it, not because I had a prejudice against her, as she repeated throughout her very lengthy deposition. The thought of being found guilty of any of her allegations was a nightmare. It sickened me, and it has been on my mind ever since I first received the HRT letter. So I'm glad I'm no longer walking around under that cloud. But on the other hand, a mediated settlement at the HRT wasn't an ideal end to the story for me because it meant that the students' claims were never rebutted. Remarkably, there was no process of investigation of any kind. The student didn't call any witnesses to corroborate her allegations about remarks I supposedly made in class, and no member of the HRT ever interviewed anybody or looked into her complaints in any other way. A number of the things I had supposedly said in emails were demonstrably false. I had the emails and had submitted them to the HRT. Her allegation that I, quote, harassed her in attempting to resolve the problem with the late exam was demonstrably false. I had offered her on multiple occasions the opportunity to write the exam at home, taking all the time she needed as she had had on previous take-home assignments, but she never acknowledged that offer in her complaint. Her contention that I could and should have submitted the exam to the disability office months prior to the deadline was ridiculous and showed a total lack of understanding of how a teacher actually makes up an exam. And my lawyer was prepared to cross-examine her, but never got the chance. And the complaints were simply left to hang. They were neither proved nor disproven. So you might ask, well, why would I agree to have mediation then? The answer is because I didn't really understand the process and I had no idea how the adjudicator would rule if it went to a formal hearing. For all I knew, the adjudicator might well find the student's account of events more credible than mine. After all, why would the student lie? Why would she make up the fact that I had supposedly made poisonous remarks if I hadn't actually done so? I couldn't prove I didn't say what she claimed, and I had every incentive to lie, I suppose. Maybe I did miss the exam because I had a prejudice against her, or simply because I was recklessly indifferent to her needs. The Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario operates on the assumption that there is a lot of bigotry in Canadian society on the part of the powerful against the powerless. The vast majority of HRT adjudicators are themselves advocates for the rights of those powerless. So given the very damning nature of the student's charges and her obvious belief in my guilt, I thought it likely that even in the absence of material evidence, I might be found at least partially responsible for her distress. Near the end of the mediation process, the adjudicator mentioned that actually the vast majority of cases brought before the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal are either abandoned, in other words, the complainant doesn't follow through, or they are resolved through mediation. And many people might think, as I suspect this adjudicator did, that this is great. All these conflicts in Canadian society, all these violations of people's rights are being peaceably settled through negotiation. But actually, in my opinion, the tribunals create two unpalatable choices for accused individuals. You can either spend years preparing for a trial with thousands of dollars of lawyers' fees and grief and worry and time spent only to have it fizzle out into a nothing, or spend years and a lot of money and take one's chances with a formal judgment for which there is no appeal and in which one is never really sure exactly what one is being charged with or what one's penalty may be if found guilty. As far as I can tell, the Human Rights Tribunal is a rigged game and one with massive costs to the public. My case alone must have cost tens of thousands of dollars of public money for the government employees in the HRT office processing the student's claim and for the government employees at the university who were involved in it. What is most remarkable to me in the whole business is that there is absolutely no disincentive to lodging frivolous charges. All complainants have to do is fill out a form, and pretty nearly any charge that fits the tribunal's mandate will be pursued. The complainant has nothing to lose except time and potentially a lot to gain in an award for damages. Even if the complainant's charges are found to be without substance, there's no penalty for the complainant. They can withdraw from the process at any time if it looks as if they're not going to win. And whether they withdraw or not, they won't be forced, for example, as in the case of a civil suit, they won't be forced to pay the defendant's legal costs. The defendant, on the other hand, has everything to lose. Money, for sure, whatever the outcome. Lost time, for sure. Lost livelihood, possibly, and lost reputation. And no real vindication, even in a best case scenario. I've never read an HRT judgment that went out of its way to say that the defendant was a good person, undeserving of the complaint. The best the accused can hope for is that after years of lost sleep and wasted time and lawyers' fees, the complaint will at last go away. Most people I've spoken to seem to think that because these tribunals can't actually sentence people to jail time, there's no reason to get too upset about them. But if you're a small business owner or landlord or anyone who isn't wealthy, thousands of dollars in legal fees plus a fine of $5,000 or more is utterly crippling. And that's not to mention the humiliation and aggravation of the whole process, the anxiety of being investigated by a state-funded body that exists precisely to sniff out cases of discrimination. One big cost is undeniable: the comfort of ordinary Canadian citizens trying to live their lives and build a career or business. Because once you've gone through this process, you definitely never want to go through it again. And many of your decisions will now be shadowed by a concern that another complaint might be on its way. As a teacher, for example, I am more and more uncertain what I can and cannot say in the classroom without getting myself in trouble. And feelings of alienation, bitterness, and resentment are almost inevitable. Because what kind of a country does this to its citizens, encouraging malcontents to make claims and forcing defendants to try to prove they're not racists or transphobes or bigots, and call that human rights? The day you realize your government doesn't actually care about you is the day you grow up and get real. But the day you realize your government will actively persecute you for non-existent crimes, that's a very bad day for you and your country.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please support us on Patreon. If even half of our subscribers gave us $1 per month, we'd be well on our way to creating more and better content. And don't forget to subscribe to us on Studio Brule.